Hello and welcome to Storytime with Mr. Laws. Today we're reading Fintan, Fedora, the World's Worst Explorer by Clive Goddard. Prologue. In many ways, Fintan Fedora had been born very lucky. He had a friendly personality, a rich family, a nice house, and was the only boy at his school with a personal butler and an endless supply of cakes and biscuits. In other ways, however, Fintan was less lucky. He was a walking disaster area. He was appallingly clumsy and accident-prone. He also had a very poor sense of direction and, to be brutally honest, wasn't particularly bright. His father had once described him as having the brains of a damp sock, an old, worn-out damp sock at that. Fintan was nothing like his older brother and sister, who appeared to be good at everything they did. He'd just been born a bit different. The kindest word to use when describing Fintan's childhood would be interesting. The kindest, perhaps, but probably not the most honest. Disastrous would be a better word. His nursery school had been forced to close down not long after he joined, when he somehow managed to fill it with wasps. No one ever worked out how Fintan had done this, but it had something to do with several jars of jam and a very large water pistol. Fintan had later been thrown out of 2 other schools after unfortunate incidents involving a flooded gymnasium and a few collapsed ceilings. At 12, he had failed all his exams. Not because he hadn't studied, but because he never managed to find his way to the examination hall. At his last attempt, he had ended up in the school kitchen and accidentally locked himself in a larder for the weekend. If it hadn't been for Gribbly, the family butler, looking after Fintan all these years, things might have turned out even worse. It had been Gribbly who disposed of the unexploded bomb that Fintan found in a field and brought home to show his mother. It was Gribbly who managed to get all the tigers back into their cage after that dreadful day out at the zoo. It was entirely thanks to Gribbly saving him from many, many disasters that Fintan had survived to the age of 14 at all. In short, Fintan was a lot of work. Chapter 1. The heat was unbearable. The air was thick with 1,000 irritating little insects crawling in Fintan's ears and up his nose. Sweat trickled down his back and legs and soaked into his thick woolly jungle socks. Gasping for breath, Fintan slashed and hacked his way through the foliage, the spiky exotic plants scratching at his face. "Oh, it's no good! I can't go on," he wailed, leaning against a mossy tree trunk and wiping his brow. "We're never going to find it in all this undergrowth. It's hopeless." "I fear you may be right, sir," came the calm, sensible voice of Gribbly. "Perhaps it would be simpler just to buy another cricket ball." Fintan took off his wide-brimmed hat and fanned himself with it. "Oh, I suppose so, Gribbly," he sighed, "but it does mean our game has come to a sudden end, and it was my turn to bat too." He was just hauling himself out of the undergrowth and back onto the beautifully kept lawn when his mother caught sight of him from the drawing-room window. "Fintan!" she shouted, with a voice that could crack mirrors and frighten dogs at 100 paces. "What on earth do you think you're doing in my shrubbery? Kindly stop trampling all over my rhododendrons with your silly great boots." Fintan made a miffed sort of face, thrust his hands into his trouser pockets, and kicked idly at a small prickly branch which had attached itself to his sock. "Your father wants a word with you, by the way," concluded his mother, closing the drawing-room window and returning her attention to her cacti collection. His father wanted a word? This wasn't something that happened very often. In fact, apart from the odd grunted "good morning" from behind his newspaper at the breakfast table, his father rarely spoke to him at all. Fintan wondered what he might have done wrong. Surely demolishing a rhododendron bush or 2 with a cricket bat wasn't serious enough to deserve a severe talking to. This didn't sound good. Fintan's older sister, Felicity, and his older brother, Flavian, were lounging in deck chairs on the lawn. There was nothing they enjoyed more than making fun of their accident-prone little brother, and this was a perfect opportunity to do so. "Oh dear, looks like the idiot boy is in trouble again," mocked Felicity loudly. "I wonder what he's broken this time." Flavian snorted with laughter and spilled a little of his drink. "Been a naughty boy again, has he? Made his daddy cross?" The pair of them laughed so hard at this thought that they had to wipe tears from their eyes, and lemonade came out of their noses. Fintan ignored them as best he could. He'd been trying to ignore them for years. Gribbly coughed politely. Perhaps you should go and see what your father wants, sir," he suggested. "And it would be wise to wash your face and hands first. I will see to it that the cricket equipment is cleared away." After a quick splash in the wash basin, a slightly less grass-stained Fintan knocked on his father's study door. "Come in," called a stern voice from within. Fintan pulled hard on the door handle, but it failed to open. He gave it a good hard tug, followed by a series of short rattling tugs, neither of which achieved anything apart from making a lot of annoying noise. "Push, you idiot," said his father, sounding exasperated already. Fintan pushed with unnecessary force. He stumbled into the room like a drunk on roller skates, tripped over the rug, and fell headfirst into a bookcase. "Oh, sorry, Dad," he said, struggling to his feet and picking up some of the books from the floor. "I can never remember whether it's push or pull, and—" Yes, interrupted his father, who had heard enough already. "Now sit down, boy. I need to talk to you." Fintan's father, Sir Filbert Fedora, was a formidable character. He was a large, old-fashioned-looking man with a ruddy face and a grey moustache the size of a fat squirrel. He had made his fortune in cakes. To be precise, he was the founder and chief executive of the Fedora Fancy Food Company, purveyors of fine cakes and biscuits. A huge portrait of him, proudly holding a grand lemon tart assortment, hung on the mahogany-panelled wall behind him. Fintan sat in the squeaky red leather chair he was offered and peered nervously at his father across the enormous desk. Sir Filbert coughed into his hand, preparing to say something a little awkward. "As you know, I'm not as young as I used to be." "Well, obviously you're not, Father. No one gets younger, do they? That would be impossible." "Will you please not interrupt me?" snapped his father. "Now just listen. I'm getting to the age now where I'm considering retirement. Running the Fedora Fancy Food Company is too much work at my age, which is why I need to have this little chat with you." Fintan's eyebrows leapt up. He knew where this was heading. "No need to worry, Father," he announced confidently. "The business will be safe in my hands. You can trust me." Sir Filbert coughed again, stood up and began to pace around the room with his hands clasped behind his back. "I'm afraid you misunderstand me, Fintan. The problem is that we can't trust you." Fintan's face fell and was replaced with a look similar to that of a small puppy who has just been told off for weeing on the carpet. "I'm sorry, son. It's just that your mother and I have been talking, and we think once you finish school, your talents would be better suited to, other areas. Leisure interests, for instance. I'm sure your brother and sister can manage the business perfectly well without you." This last bit of news came as no surprise to Fintan. His goody-goody siblings, Felicity and Flavian, could do no wrong. They'd always been more popular, more successful, and, well, more everything. This was terrible. It wasn't fair. It was unjust. "But you can trust me," he protested. "I'd be really good at running the business." His father stopped pacing and looked sternly at him. "Really?" he said, staring straight into Fintan's puppy-dog eyes. "We can trust you, can we? What about the time we got you that hamster?" "Well, that wasn't my fault," pleaded Fintan. "It got in the vacuum cleaner all on its own." "Maybe so, but you didn't have to try and get it out by turning the machine to blow. The mess took nearly a week to clean up. And what about the time we trusted you to organise that barbecue? Your mother was furious when those 3 fire engines turned up. They ruined the lawn. Fintan pulled a hurt face. Well, that wasn't my fault either. How was I to know that red bucket had petrol in it? Sir Fintan raised a hand, as if to say there was no point in arguing about it. That's enough, he said. I'm afraid I've made my decision. Sorry, son. You'll just have to find something else to do with your future. Fintan returned to his room, sat miserably on his bed, and fumed. He'd show his father he wasn't useless. Chapter 2. Meanwhile, approximately 40 miles south of Fedora Hall, and to the left a bit, Mrs. Edith Bumstead was cooking tea for her horribly spotty, overweight son, Eric. Ignoring the cigarette ash she was dropping into her saucepan of baked beans, she scraped the burnt and blackened contents out onto a slice of stale white bread. "Beans on bread?" said Eric indignantly. "Couldn't we at least have toast? This is just bread. It's like raw toast." His mother flicked her stinky brown cigarette into the huge pile of washing up and wiped her hands on her cardigan. "It's not my fault the toast is conked out. It hasn't worked properly since you put that beef burger in it," she yelled. Eric ignored this and pulled a stupid face, which was quite easy with a face like his. "But I'm fed up to the back teeth with beans, Mum. Why can't we have some proper food?" Mrs. Bumstead sat at the table next to her son and adopted a sad voice with a matching face. "Because we don't have much money, Eric. Things have been difficult since your dear father passed away, God rest his soul." "He didn't pass away, Mum," shouted Eric. "He's in prison. I've known that for years, so you can stop pretending." "Anyway, you're fat enough as it is," hollered Mrs. Bumstead, changing the subject as quickly as she could. "You spend all your time lying about on the sofa watching the telly. If you could be bothered to go out and get a job, maybe we could afford something a bit more interesting to eat." Eric had recently left school with no qualifications, no prospects, and no friends. The only thing he had to show for all his years in education was a large box of chalk stolen from the stationery cupboard, and several catering-sized tins of beans stolen from the school kitchen. Since then, he hadn't worked a single day. His mother thrust the newspaper in his face, open at the job advertisements. Eric's attention, however, was drawn to a large picture on the opposite page. Beneath the headline, "Millionaire Cake Tycoon to Retire," was a full-colour photograph of Sir Filbert Fedora and a long article on his life and successful business empire. It was the word millionaire that had attracted Eric's attention. Eagerly, he traced a finger through the paragraphs beneath, mumbling the words out loud as he did so. It appeared the Fedora family was one of the richest in England. It also appeared there was a 14-year-old son who was the perfect target for kidnapping. A big grin spread across Eric's fat bean juice-spattered face. "I've just had a brilliant idea," he announced.